My name is Li Xiao. I come from a small town in Chinatown where dreams do take flight, but often their wings are clipped. Since childhood, I would look at the sky from my window and think, one day I too will cross that sky. And when fate brought me to the land of America, I felt as if my dream had come true. But this is not a story of dreams. This is the story of revenge that stole my sleep, my desires, even my laughter. When I first came here, everything was new, dazzling, and huge. I thought I had finally found a world where I could build my happiness. I married a man, Daniel. He was simple, sincere, and in his eyes I saw honesty. The day I wore my wedding dress, I believed no one would ever be able to break me again. But I made one mistake. I assumed that everyone wanted to see me happy. My sister-in-law. Yes, Daniel's sister, Clara. She smiled, spoke sweetly, but in her eyes there was always a jealousy toward me. Maybe she thought I didn't deserve this home. Maybe she thought her brother was no longer hers. And then came the day that changed my life forever. Right before my eyes, she tore apart my wedding dress with her own hands. It wasn't just fabric. It was my dream, my identity, my dignity. When she laughed as she ripped it, I felt as though someone had torn my soul apart. That moment, I stayed silent. But behind that silence, a vow was hidden. A vow that I would answer Clara for every smile she took from me. A vow that I would give her pain equal to mine. A vow that this story would end where I decide, not where she wishes. Today, I'm telling you my story. Because at the root of every revenge, there lies a scream. And mine. No one has heard until now. But now, they will. Every word, every sentence is part of my fire. And in this fire, Clara will surely burn. When I left China, my suitcase didn't carry much. A few clothes, a few books, and a small lucky charm my mother gave me, and she always said, Xiao, when life feels unfamiliar, touch this. It will remind you that you're never alone. After arriving in America, I saw tall skyscrapers for the first time, so different from the narrow lanes of my village. Here, everything was big, bright, glittering. But behind that glitter, I felt loneliness too. I met Daniel in college. He was in the same class as me, studying history. His eyes were always buried in books, but whenever he spoke to me, I felt as if someone was truly listening. Slowly, conversations turned into friendship, and friendship blossomed into love. He never made me feel like a foreigner. When he proposed, tears filled my eyes. I thought fate had finally brought me my destination, our wedding day. It still lives fresh in my memory. I wore a gown of red and white, reflecting both cultures, Chinese tradition and American style. When I looked in the mirror, I truly felt like a princess. But every princess's story has a villain. For me, it was Clara. From the very beginning, she looked at me with cold eyes. When I first visited her home, she offered me tea with a smile, but that smile was fake. As if saying, "You don't belong here. You can never be my sister-in-law." I ignored that look. I thought maybe I was misunderstanding. But eyes never lie. After marriage, when we returned home, the atmosphere was strange. Daniel's mother, Martha, was kind and gentle. She hugged me and said, "Welcome to the family, Xiao." Her voice was filled with sincerity. But Clara, her eyes repeatedly told me, "This house will never be yours." And I couldn't understand what her anger was really about. Did she dislike my closeness with her brother? Did she feel I was stealing his love away? Or was it simply because I was foreign? I pushed those questions away. I told myself, time heals everything. But time didn't heal. It deepened the wounds. She began hating my laughter. She began interfering in everything I did. And then, the day came. The day she tore my wedding gown. Even now I can still hear that sound. Churr! The scream of fabric. She looked into my eyes and smiled. That smile carried victory, while I stood in defeat. In that moment I turned to stone. But only on the outside. Inside, a fire had already been lit. That evening was not like any other. The house glowed softly with light. The smell of Martha's cooking drifted in from the kitchen. I stood in front of the mirror in my room. Yes, the wedding was long over, but I still kept my gown safely in the wardrobe. Whenever I looked at it, the memories of perfection came flooding back. That day, I decided to wear the gown again. Just for myself. I opened the wardrobe and pulled it out. The moment I ran my fingers over the fabric, I felt my heartbeat return, the same excitement, the same joy. I put on the gown and stood before the mirror. "Xiao, you really are beautiful," I whispered to myself. Just then, there was a gentle knock at the door. "Who is it?" I asked. No reply came. I thought it must be Daniel. Smiling, I opened the door. But standing there was Clara. In her eyes was that same strange glimmer, like a hunter smiling at its prey. With that invitation, she stepped into my room. "So, this is the famous gown?" she whispered. Her voice carried mockery, a sweet venom dripping from every word. I gave a faint smile and replied, "Yes, it's very special to me." Clara looked at the gown from head to toe, as if it weren't something precious, but just a toy she could break at will. She reached out and touched the fabric. "Silk, isn't it? So delicate. Just like your happiness." Something inside me tightened. "Clara, please, don't..." But before I could finish, she suddenly grabbed the gown with both hands and pulled with all her strength. Trrrr. That sound still echoes in my ears. Before my eyes, pieces of fabric flew. My gown, my dream, my identity all torn apart, scattered at my feet. I froze. My hands trembled, my breath quickened. I wanted to scream, to cry, but my voice was trapped in my throat. Clara looked into my eyes. Her smile widened. "Not so special anymore, is it?" she whispered. Then she left. The door opened, then shut. But inside me, a new door had opened. I bent down, picking up the shreds of my gown. Tears fell on the fabric. And then, in that moment, I swore an oath. These tears will be the last. From now on, only fire will leave my eyes. Clara, you tore my dream. Now I will tear your sleep. You ripped apart my gown. Now I will rip apart your life. That night was the longest night of my life. I didn't sleep in bed. I sat in the darkness, turning my tears into weapons. And that same night, I decided this story would be mine alone, and its ending would be only what I choose. That night, when Clara shut the door and left the echo of her footsteps behind, something inside me had shattered. But in that very shattering, a new face of mine was born. I was no longer the innocent Xiao, who only dreamed. I was now the Xiao, who had sworn to make Clara pay for every stolen laugh. I looked into my reflection in the cracked wardrobe mirror. My eyes were red, but they no longer held fear, only fire. I told myself, "Xiao, if you stay silent, she will erase you. But if you answer back, she will tremble at your name." That night, I did not sleep. I began to think, what is Clara's weakness? She always wanted to appear perfect before everyone. In front of her mother, her friends, even Daniel. So if I wanted to break her, I had to rip off her mask of fake perfection. Morning came. I washed my face, hid the swelling of my eyes, and went to the breakfast table. Martha smiled. Daniel was reading the newspaper. And Clara! She sat there as if nothing had happened. Her smile seemed even more poisonous. I looked at her, and for the first time, a faint smile curved on my lips. Yes, the smile that marked the beginning of revenge. That day I decided I would watch her every move, her friends, her outings, her fears. I would learn everything. Because the simplest way to defeat an enemy is to strike at their true weakness. The first chance came that very week. Clara cared obsessively about fashion and image. She was invited to a small local event where she would be presented as a style icon. She wanted everyone to look at her and say, "Clara, you're so perfect." I thought if that image broke, so would her smile. The seed of my first move was sown that day. It was small now, but I knew. When it grew into a tree, its shadow would consume Clara, and I waited for the moment when I would strike my first blow. Since the day Clara tore my wedding gown, one thing became crystal clear. Confronting her head-on was useless, because that's what she wanted, for me to scream, fight, humiliate myself in front of everyone. But I would not fall into her trap. The first rule of my revenge was simple: strike in silence. Clara was proud of her name, her image, her reputation. She craved perfection everywhere, from her clothes to her words. Even at home, she acted as if every gesture needed an audience. I understood her little game, and now it was time to make my first attack on that mask. That week was special. Clara had to attend a local fashion lifestyle event. A small gathering, but to her it meant everything, because people from the city would be there, and she wanted them all to say, "Clara, you are our icon." That morning, as she dressed, I stood at the door watching her. She wore a glittering silver gown, her hair styled to perfection, the air heavy with the scent of expensive perfume. She looked at me and smiled. "Xiao, if you want, you can come with me. But you know, the atmosphere there might be a little, too big for you." Her smile set fire in my chest. But I didn't answer. I only smiled back. And in that very moment, a plan began to form in my mind. The plan wasn't something grand, just a small push, but enough to shake Clara's perfect image in front of everyone. While she was getting ready for the event, I quietly peeked into her room. Her handbag was lying on the table. Inside it was her makeup kit, the one thing she relied on the most. A wicked smile spread in my mind. I slowly opened the bag and poured just a little water into her foundation bottle, just enough to turn it runny, so it would look strange on her face. Clara trusted her makeup blindly, and I wanted her laughter to crumble by that very trust. She left for the event without noticing a thing, and I waited for the moment when her perfection would fall apart before everyone's eyes. The event was held that evening in a small but elegant city hall. I stayed home, but my heart was there with her. I knew the moment she used the foundation and walked onto the stage, my tiny adjustment would expose her secret. Daniel took her there, leaving me at home. "Why aren't you coming, Zhao?" he asked before leaving. I gave a faint smile. "Not in the mood today. You two go, enjoy yourselves." He kissed my forehead and left. As soon as the door closed, I stood by the window. In my hands were still the torn pieces of my wedding gown pieces I had kept hidden. I looked at them and whispered, "Today the first debt will be settled, Clara." The hall was glittering with lights. People were chatting, cameras were flashing, and Clara entered with full confidence. She wore her silver gown, her makeup exactly the way she thought was flawless, "Oh my God, Clara, you look stunning." People showered her with compliments. She smiled, as though the evening belonged to her alone. Then her name was called on stage. She walked up slowly, her steps almost like a dance, her eyes glowing with pride. But as soon as the spotlight hit her makeup began to betray her. The foundation, instead of smooth coverage, appeared patchy and blotchy. With the first hint of sweat, the foundation started to run down her face. Her skin looked odd, stained, uneven. The crowd's eyes shifted. Where there had been admiration, now there was murmuring. Clara's makeup. What went wrong? How could she come to such an event like this? Clara hurriedly pulled out her compact from her purse, desperately trying to fix it. But the more she fixed, the worse it became. Because the foundation was already ruined, turned watery. Panic filled her eyes. Her smile looked forced. And the perfect icon Clara stood before everyone incomplete, exposed, humiliated. Daniel later told me the details, but I had already imagined it perfectly. That night, when Clara returned home, her face carried a storm of rage and shame. She went straight to her room and shut the wardrobe door behind her. From outside, I could hear her throwing clothes, crying, maybe even scolding herself in anger. I sat calmly in the living room, a cup of green tea in my hands, an innocent smile on my face. Daniel came over and said, "Poor Clara, she had such a bad day." I looked him in the eye and replied softly, "Oh, really? I always thought she was perfect." Daniel didn't notice a thing. But inside me, a silence had broken. The first strike of my revenge had landed. This was only the beginning, because I knew Clara would no longer sleep peacefully. And this was just a small game. The real fire was yet to come. The next morning at the breakfast table, the atmosphere was heavy. Daniel was lost in his newspaper, Martha sipped her coffee, and Clara was silent. Her face still bore the scars of last night. Dark circles under her eyes, her lips pressed tight, as if she was swallowing anger every second. I placed toast on my plate and asked calmly, "Clara, how was the event yesterday?" She looked at me, as if I had offered her a cup of poison. Her eyes narrowed. "You know, everything went wrong." I tilted my head with innocent curiosity. "Oh, really? Strange. Because you're always so perfect." My voice was sweet, but only Clara could taste the hidden venom. She turned her face away, but I could see the seed of suspicion had been planted in her heart. Days passed. Clara started checking everything obsessively. Before applying makeup, she would sniff the foundation, shake it, and sometimes even ask her mother, "Mom, did you touch my things?" Martha would laugh. "No, dear, why would I?" But her restlessness kept growing, and I was enjoying it. One evening, while I was in the kitchen making tea, Clara suddenly appeared behind me. Her eyes locked on me. "Xiao, did you go into my room?" I looked at the steam rising from my cup and answered in a calm voice, "Into your room? Whatever for?" Because how else did my makeup get ruined? Someone must have tampered with it." Her voice trembled. I turned to look at her, the same innocent smile on my face. "Clara, if your makeup went wrong, maybe the brand itself isn't good enough. Sometimes things just fail." My words slid into her ears like knives. She stormed off in anger. I stayed right there, steam rising from my cup, a faint smile curling on my lips. Because now I was certain. Clara was slowly losing her mind. But revenge was never that simple. The moment suspicion grew inside her, she began to play the game too. She started guarding her belongings, locking her room, and sometimes giving me strange looks as if to say, "I know, Zhao, you're up to something." I only smiled inwardly, because suspicion is the most dangerous poison of all. And I knew. The more she suspected, the more her sleep would vanish. That night, I sat in my room, writing in my diary. I wrote, "Clara is already trapped in my web. The first strike was small, but the impact has sunk deep. Now I need to plan the next move, one that will shatter her trust completely." I set down my pen. Moonlight spilled through the window. And in that glow, the path of my revenge became crystal clear. I had always known one strike is never enough to bring someone down. You have to cut the roots slowly, and Clara's roots were her trust. If I could destroy her trust in her brother, her mother, her friends, she would be left all alone, and loneliness is the deadliest poison. One afternoon, I sat quietly in the living room. Daniel had gone to the office, Martha to visit her neighbor. It was just Clara and me in the house. She came out of her room, holding her phone like it was treasure. She was always chatting with friends, posting on Instagram. That was her world, her social image. And suddenly, a thought struck me like lightning. If I could strike at her social image, she would crumble even faster. I began observing her quietly. When she put her phone down, when she typed her password, when her attention slipped. Little by little, I learned her habits. One day, while she was in the shower, her phone lay on the sofa. The screen lit up, showing a 4-digit passcode. I quickly tried a few numbers. First, 1225, her birthday, wrong. Second, 0308, Daniel's birthday, wrong. Third, 0614, her mother's birthday, correct. The phone unlocked. A cold smile spread across my face. I hurried through her chats and photos. She boasted endlessly to her friends about clothes, shopping, her so-called perfect life. Her gallery was flooded with selfies. But I found something else and sent draft messages. They were angry notes, probably written in frustration, never sent. Nobody understands me. I hate how Mom always praises Xiao. Sometimes I feel like Daniel doesn't care about me. These were her true feelings. Her fear, her anger, her loneliness. I took screenshots of them and placed her phone back exactly as it was. Now I had her weakness in my hands. That night, lying in bed, I scrolled through those screenshots. Every word was poison. And I knew I would feed that poison back to her, slowly until she choked on it herself. I whispered to myself, "Xiao, your next move is ready. To break Clara's fake smile, you'll expose her true thoughts. But not all at once, slowly, so she never realizes where the strike comes from." I closed my eyes. For the first time, I slept in peace, because I knew the game would no longer stay within this house. The game was about to spill into the outside world. Sometimes you don't need a direct attack to win. Sometimes, all you need is to make your enemy afraid of their own shadow. And now I had that weapon, Clara's secrets. The following Sunday, there was a plan for a small family dinner. Daniel said a few of his college friends would also join. Clara lit up with excitement. She wanted Daniel's friends to see her as the perfect sister. She began preparations a whole week in advance, choosing outfits, planning hairstyles, even interfering with the menu. I only watched silently, because I already knew. This time my strike would come right there in front of everyone. The night of the dinner, the table was set. Guests were seated. Laughter and chatter filled the air. Clara, with her usual fake smile, tried her best to impress. She kept saying, "I always want the best for my brother, and now that Xiao is part of our family, I consider her my little sister too." Her words burned like fire inside me, but on my face, I kept the same innocent smile. I turned toward her, that same innocent smile on her face. "Clara, If your makeup got ruined, maybe the brand itself isn't good enough. Things fail sometimes. My words cut through her ears like knives. She stormed off in anger. I stood there, steam rising from my cup, a faint smile curling on my lips. Because now I was certain. Clara was slowly going mad. But revenge is never that simple, Ian. As Clara's suspicion grew, she began to play her own game. She started keeping an eye on her belongings. She began locking her bedroom door. And sometimes she looked at me with strange, piercing eyes, as if saying, "I know, Zhao, you're up to something." I only smiled inwardly, because suspicion is the most dangerous poison of all. And I knew the more she suspected, the less she would sleep. That night,